Hey guys, what is up? A lot of new changes with Invincible. Mark's training to get stronger to fight the Viltrumites. Oliver is growing up to be a quite strong young lad. You got Debbie back in the dating pool. Eve's going to college. Cecil is still being Cecil, but we're getting to know a little bit more about him. And Rex is trying not to be Rex. These are my thoughts on Season 3 of Invincible. And one thing I just want to call out real quick. This should be a premiere show. This is a premiere show. There's probably more people watching Invincible than a lot of the shows they have on Amazon. I have a feeling there's more people watching Invincible than even watching, for example, The Boys. I could be wrong, but that's just a personal feeling that I have. I'm sure there's people watching Invincible that probably should not be watching Invincible, like young kids. Here's my request. And this is my first thought, and it has nothing to do with the quality of the show. Can we please have these shows coming out at a better time? Was I up at 2 o'clock in the morning? Yes. I shouldn't have been, but I was. Was I going to stay up and watch 3 episodes of Invincible? I wanted to, but I know I didn't need to, and I know I couldn't. So I had to go to bed. And I woke up today and watched all 3 episodes, and were really, really good, really, really high quality. But let this come out at a better time. Let this come out at a time where people can, let the conversations flare up on social media. These shows need to come out at a more premiere time, because that's exactly what they are. Treat them like a premiere show, and people will look at them like a premiere show. I know how fun it was watching The Penguin, and then after The Penguin, being able to go, see if someone was doing a spoiler cast on what happened in this episode of The Penguin, and seeing the fervor and seeing the conversation on social media. Will I see that conversation today? Sure. But it's just not as exciting, and it's not the same thing. It's just not. And if any of you have watched a show that comes on premiere time, it's just there's something different about it. Everyone's watching around the same time. You can text your buddy. Whereas now I know I've seen it and my buddy hasn't seen it. And I don't know when my buddy's going to get to see it. And so that's just a request that I have for future seasons. I know that Season 3 will be like this, but I hope Season 4 and I hope other shows that Amazon, that Netflix, a lot of these people do, I wish they would put them out at a better time. But that's just my personal thought. This is my personal thing. Especially when you drop 3 at a time. Especially when you drop 3 at a time. But as we were saying, there's a lot of setting up the first episode. And I appreciated the setting up, because I think this season is going to have a lot. And I think we're going to be going through a lot. And there's still a lot of questions that I have. So it was really good to see, before the downfall of their relationship, it was really good to see Mark Grayson and Cecil really working together as a cohesive unit. And really, they probably, to save the world, probably really do need to be a cohesive unit. I think there's elements of where, Mark is afraid to become his father, but then at the same time is afraid to become like Cecil as well. But I think Mark has a little bit of both within them, and he's hesitant. And I think he has a lot more of Cecil than we even realize, but I'll get to that later. But I do appreciate the setting up before the downfall of their relationship, and I think what I appreciated is that there was moments for relationships to build and time to breathe before the craziness of episode 2 and episode 3. But getting into a little bit of the show, some questions I have is, who are these time thieves? You got these twins who kind of show up and, are trying to steal the Declaration of Independence for some reason. I'm kind of curious what's going on there. What are they about, and who are they? I'm sure we're going to run into them again this season, I would hope. But what was the reason? What's the consequence? And supposedly that's from the comic, so it has something deep to do with the characters. But then, with Rex and, helping out and encouraging, Mark to date Eve, you have Multi-Paul, who's going to be played by Simu Liu. You have him showing up and fighting, fighting Rex, fighting Invincible, but trying to kill Rex because of the death of his sister. And we have seen Multi-Paul before in one of the clips of prior seasons where he's in prison. So we know he's not, usually on the side of good, for example. He's not fighting for the good side like his sister is. The only thing I have with this, I think it's a cool character. I think it was a cool moment for that to happen. Yada, yada, yada. It propels the plot forward. Here's my thing. We're hiring a more well-known aimed actor. Maybe Simu Liu is not as expensive as I would think he probably is. Because it's not like he's in just everything, but he is getting more roles. He is getting pushed by the powers that be, with Disney and Marvel being a superhero in the Marvel movies and things like that. I think there could have been a voice actor who could have been a lot more affordable for the show. People wouldn't have cared, because I don't think people cared that all these famous people are playing in this show. I think Steven Yeun makes sense. I think, what's his name? The guy that plays Omni-Man. I feel terrible. I'm blanking on his name, but Simpson, but his last name's Simpson. But J.K. Simmons. Sorry. Okay, but J.K. Simmons. It makes sense for that character to be playing Omni-Man in this role. Okay, Seth Rogen's producer, so I'm sure he's not necessarily making them pay as much because he's actually producing. He's one of the co-producers or whatever of the show. So, I'm sure when Seth Rogen pops up for his little cameos, it's not as big of a deal. But when you start adding all these celebrities in these little mini parts, how much are you paying them just to have these little tiny parts they have to come in and do? And would a voice actor that you have filling in the other roles, would some of these other voice actors be able to do that job? And could we get some better animation? I do enjoy Invincible's animation, but I do think it could be better. And the reason I know it could be better is because they're spending so much money on actors. That's just a personal grievance I have, but it is what it is. It's gonna hurt when Rex does eventually die. We almost thought we were gonna lose him there, and we didn't, when he was in the little scuffle with Multi-Paul. But, it is going to be a bummer. I think that's the character when he eventually... Because I was so broken when he... last season when he looked like he was going to die. Because it's like, okay, he's had this arc and he's constantly been changing and getting a little better. And I thought he was a dead man. And then he survived. And it's like, okay, thank goodness. Thank goodness this character survived, because I thought he died. But I think the writing is going to be on the wall. And I don't know. I haven't caught up. I've read the very beginning of the comics, but I'm not where the show is by any means. But I think we are going to get to that point where he's eventually going to die. And I'm worried that it's going to be this season, and it's going to be a bummer. Because I appreciate the character. I think he's funny. He gives a little bit of levity to the show. And I appreciate how he's trying to be more Demore. He's trying to be a little bit more, not mindful of his actions and who he is. It's kind of like you meet somebody who's not very considerate, but they're still trying to be considerate. They're trying. And it's like, well, at least you're trying, And he kind of reminds me of that. He's that guy who doesn't really think about what he says or what he does, but he's trying to. And it provides some humor and some levity to the show that I personally appreciate, which was one of the things I wrote down, was that it gave us moments to breathe. To just go, okay. Because we know it's going to get crazy. It's going to get crazy. But something I can relate to in the show is Oliver. I think all of us, we have dreams of being more and doing more. And when you have the ability to be more and do more at such a young age, it probably is a very difficult thing to be told no, or to be told to wait, or to be told that you can't do these things that make you special and unique. It almost reminds me of not Invincible, but it almost reminds me of Incredibles, where Dash says, well, if everyone's special, no one's special. And that's the thing. Oliver is special. But we know, and Mark and them know, that him being so young, that they have to take these things slow, not just for his protection, but for other people's protection as well, which we'll see the consequences of him getting into action a little too early later on in the other episodes. But I still really appreciate him, and I appreciate the kind of showing that, that part of a kid. I think is pretty special and unique. Eve and Mark, I'm happy this is finally happening between them two. I'm happy they're actually having a relationship and a romantic relationship. It gets pretty rocky in the first episode, and then it leads into something a little more special, but that's the one thing I haven't spoiled on with the show. I do know where that goes, and I'm finally happy that something like that in their relationship is actually starting to happen. That, like I said, that's something I'm happy with, and I'm happy they're continuing to finally push that forward, because I didn't want to wait another season for those two to be together. I'm ready for those two to be together now. That's what I'm ready for. It was great to have Doc Seismic, the progressively evil scheme, bringing out Cecil's dark secret. That's what I wrote down in my notes. But having Doc Seismic, this like progressive lefty evil dude, it's just kind of funny, and at least somebody can make fun of themselves. I'm assuming that most people writing on this show probably lean a certain way, like most of Hollywood. But the fact that they're able to make fun of themselves in that kind of way, I think is fun. And I think he's just a fun villain. And his setting up what he does in the show, everything was pointing to him. When he had his hands on the ground, he was like meditating. You could tell that all things were leading towards him messing with things around the world. But the fact that he was able to communicate with these worms and these creatures from the underground was a interesting twist that I thought was really cool. That, of course, like I said, sets up some very dark things that Cecil has kept secret from everyone. Because everyone's, all the heroes have been abducted. And even when Eve and Invincible go to try to save the day, they get captured as well. And so you are kind of wondering, well, who is going to save the day? And then when you see Darkwing, you're like, oh. And then when you hear him say, are we going to do this, sir? And he says, yes. Well, it's like, okay, well, they're letting the cat out of the bag with what they've been working on, the thing that we saw they were working on last season. And it's kind of cool because, I'm digging the Civil War approach this season is giving us. And what's interesting about it, because of the setup and everything that happens, is, yes, Cecil is wrong. He is wrong for allowing this dude to, mess with these creatures and all these things without telling anyone. There's things that he's wrong about, even though and mainly the secret part especially is where he's really wrong. But Mark's wrong too. Mark not being able to have a civil conversation. Mark not being so dogmatic in how he feels, even if it's right, it can become wrong based off how he acts. And what's funny is that when he does blow up on Cecil, when he does get mad at Cecil, when he does do all these things at Cecil, he is the aggressor in that situation. Cecil tries to calm him down multiple times, and Mark is unrelenting. Mark is unwavering. And Mark is so dogmatic in his beliefs that he's not willing to waver to, the different things. And I think when Cecil accuses him of the things he accuses him of and calls him out, I think it's accurate. I do think it's pretty accurate what he said about Mark. Because, for example, I don't think Mark can separate the difference between Darkwing and Sinclair. Those are two different people who had two different sets of crimes, but there's a level to this. And maybe Darkwing could have been changed. There's a possibility that he could have been reformed. Whereas Sinclair, I think he's just, he's being forced to do what he's doing. I don't think he has the purest intentions at heart. I still think he's a bloody, cold serial killer, But there is a difference. There is a difference in the fact that Mark is unwilling to recognize that, but then is willing to recognize that in his brother, shows a little bit of hypocrisy within the character, and I think Cecil's totally right to call him out for it. doesn't mean necessarily, deontological reasons. Doesn't mean that, Cecil is right either. He is taking a utilitarian approach and saying, you know what? If I can use these guys, I can use good people, I can use bad people, I gotta save the world, And which is kind of, we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's definitely something kind of cool that I'm appreciative of, that they really took time with Cecil to develop. The other thing I thought was interesting, setting up the Civil War, is your ride or die. It's like the people that are going to be with you versus the people that are going to go against you. I think it really set up some things where maybe some people do feel a little conflicted about the way that Mark was acting. But that's your dude. You can have that conversation later on. You can address those issues later on. But when times come tough and you got to stand by your dude, your boy, your friend, your comrade, you stand by your comrade. There's a certain point where there's no questions there, and you just stand by your dude. And I appreciated the ride or die nature with the characters supporting Mark in his great time of need, because Cecil because he's so intelligent, Cecil kicked his butt a little bit, just from his skill, just from his knowledge. The fact that he was planned. He is the Batman of the Invincible universe. It ain't Darkwing. It is Cecil. He is the prepper of all preppers. You give him prep time, he's a dangerous, dangerous man. And that's what they gave him. They gave him that prep time he needed to give Mark a little bit of a spanking, which I think Mark needed, because Mark imploded in that moment. He should have been more rational. He should have been more calm. He should have addressed how he felt about how he felt it, instead of being so violent at the very beginning, or aggressive at the very beginning, like he was going to be violent. And so I think he did deserve a little bit of that spanking. And I think later on, when he's sitting with Eve, he kind of shows that it affected him. That it actually affected him, and it made him think a little deeper about maybe what he did. And I think it was well earned. It was well earned. I'm still on Invincible's side, but just looking at it for story-wise and looking at the character development, it was a butt-whooping that was well earned. So, just to add this before we really progress into everything else, just wanted to touch on this real quick. Them still showing what's happening with Omni-Man and Alan. We're getting a little more of a hint of how powerful and strong Alan is. Something that Omni-Man was kind of shocked to realize, that, Alan was actually still alive. And, I'm curious to see where that's going to go. I feel like we're going to get like a whole season with that. A whole episode with that. And I'm pretty excited to see what's going to come from that. But there's not too much there. But you can just tell that, Omni-Man's actually missing his wife. He's actually wanting to go back home to Earth. I don't know if Earth would accept him because of all the brutal things he's done. And I don't know if he deserves to be accepted on Earth for all the brutal things he's done. I mean, he is a mass murderer. But it almost doesn't matter, because the Viltrumites are coming to Earth, and we're going to need as many people to help us survive as possible. Cecil's backstory, which kind of gets into the second episode, I really appreciated his arc as a whole, and I appreciate the balance they gave Cecil in the moments dealing with Mark. The fact that in the comic, I believe, is a little different. In the comic, from my understanding, from what I've heard, is that he's a lot more aggressive. He's a lot more, he's the one that's doing all the yelling, But I like that they switched that, because I think it challenges Invincible more. It challenges Mark more. But it also gives Cecil a little bit of layers. And layers where it's like, he, in a lot of ways, probably sees himself in Mark. And what's funny is asking that question, will Mark eventually come to the same understanding and philosophy that Cecil had to come to, with his leader and what his leader did for him? I thought that was, I think that whole arc is super interesting. And showing us how he got his scars, and, it did leave me with a question. And, it was about the people that died. Cecil, you would think, okay, if other people died, then Cecil would have definitely died, right? That's kind of the thought process. And maybe it was just that the medical teams were there to assist him immediately, and that's why he got to live, same as the other terrorists, the two terrorists, how they got to live. But it's a shame that 17 other people died, and it's like, well, did the government just allow them to die? Like, could they have lived? Or is it one of those things where, the medical teams were there at that moment to assist them, but the gases escaped out into the city, and then when they got to certain other people, those people tragically passed away, and there was no one to help them. That's what I'm assuming, but that is kind of a question that I would have for the show, is that, if you're able to save these people, why weren't you able to save those people? But maybe that's just to show that there is cost, and sometimes you really can't do, you can try to save who you want to save, but there's only so much you really realistically can do, and that's just the reality and the sad reality of life. Going back to Cecil's arc, I do think that, with morality, you're talking about utilitarian or deontological, reasons for doing things. Morality can be a balance sometimes. If we look at our political landscape, sometimes I get concerned with, you have both sides maybe go a little far one way or another way. We've seen that, with one side for a long time, and I think maybe we may see that a little bit on the other side, but people always go a little too far, and sometimes the best thing is a sense of balance. And I kind of wonder, with Cecil, I kind of wonder for him if he found a little bit of a balance for his morality to work within the confines of trying to save the world, trying to do the right thing, or if his situation is, he just went ahead and went full on the other way. He was so strong this way, but then after being in jail, working with some of the people in the jail, he decided to go the far end of the other way, the same way his leader was. I don't know where they're going with that, but I do think some people can be redeemed. And I think someone like the Darkwing character could be redeemed. But clearly he's using some of these other people for his ends and excusing things that may be a little bit of evil. He's just, the ends justify the means. And him working through that, I think is pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. But it does say, leads my thought with this before I kind of transition to some other things. Poor Donald, his second in command, because you can see that Donald is like the same age, that he is now when Cecil's younger, when Cecil gets this job. And it just kind of makes you wonder, how many times has Donald really died? We know he's died a decent amount, more than people will more than Cecil will admit. But, just poor Donald. That's my thought. It's like, poor Donald. Like, how much of Donald is still Donald at this point, This was something that we were revealed in season 2. But just seeing him there and realizing that, he's the same age. He hasn't aged at all. It's like, yeah, because he's been through a lot. He has been through a lot. Now, as we start to transition into episode 3, the beginning was fine, but it was silly to me. It was a little silly. The music and everything. I almost thought something was wrong when I was watching my show. I was like, wait, is something wrong with the volume? Because I'm hearing something, but it doesn't. To be honest with you, I thought that I was like watching the show, but I thought that it had messed up and it was still playing an ad in the background. So even though I'm looking at the show, I'm hearing an ad. That's what I thought. That's what I thought at the very beginning when the music was playing like that and it kept on playing like that. I'm like, this must be an ad. This might be like a 1.5-minute ad or something. Like, what's going on? And turned out, no, it's just the way they decided to tell that little short story of these criminals who are really trying to make it, but life just keeps on getting them hard, so they eventually have to go rob the bank again. They got away with it the first time. They tried to live a better life, and, life got them rough, and so they went out and, did what they did. But, it was fine. It was whatever. It is what it is, But I'm appreciating, the transitioning from that, Invincible and his brother come and save the day. His brother Oliver, they come in, save the day, beat them up, and Oliver is a very interesting character because he is the dynamic of nature versus nurture, and which one's going to hold out in the end. Is his Viltrumite-ness going to hold out, or is his nurture going to hold out? I think there's a little bit more humanity in Mark because, it did take Mark a while to get his powers, which usually, supposedly, I think they addressed this last season, that usually that doesn't happen. Usually you get your powers much earlier, which is always why Omni-Man never thought his son would get his powers, because it took so long. But then Invincible finally did get his powers, which was really cool. But, Oliver got his in a more natural pace, got him a lot earlier. And in some ways, he might be a little bit more powerful than Mark in some ways. I don't know if he's going to be stronger than Mark right now, because I have no idea. But right now, I'm going to say no. But I do have a weird feeling that he's actually might be a little faster than Mark, or he's going to be faster than Mark. And it is interesting to see that dynamic of, he's, for a short time, he's been around human beings, but how much of that is needed to, ward off that deep thing inside of him that is a Viltrumite, of someone who maybe doesn't carry the same morality that a human being would, or at least some human beings would. And so that whole thing with the third episode I thought was really, really great. I thought it was great seeing the new costumes and the new suits. I love his Omni Kid, they probably need to call him Omni Kid, but Omni-Man Kid, it's a good suit, and, it's a lot of fun, and I like seeing Mark's new suit, and it looks really, really good on him. And those moments are really fun before they get into the crazy stuff, Oliver, the whole situation with the twins coming back, and, Invincible has to go out and stop the ship. And so Oliver comes in and ends up killing the twins. I kind of hope, the twins were fun, but I hope they are gone now. I think they have served their purpose officially. I don't know if there's really a need to bring them back, personally, for me. But, I think how he just brutally killed, especially the second one. The first one died brutally, but the second one, begging for his life, it kind of shows that the Viltrumite side of, Oliver is very, very present, and that maybe nature has won over. But the one thing that may keep him from that is the love for Mark and, Debbie, who is basically his mom now. He calls her mom, all those things. Debbie really has, loved and cared for this young boy who isn't hers. And I think he truly does love her. I think he truly does care about her. And maybe their love is enough to keep him from going to the dark side. I don't know, but that's just how I personally feel. It's kind of complicated too, because it's like, how do you punish a superhuman kid? How do you punish a kid who could destroy you in an instant? And talking to him lovingly and caringly might be the only way to get him to turn back, to the good side. But that definitely shows, the hypocrisy again. He has concerns of it. He is trying to protect his little brother, but he's not throwing his little brother in prison. He's not throwing his little brother in prison. He's ready to throw all these other people in prison, but he's not ready to throw him in prison. So there is a little bit of hypocrisy, but it's understandable. We all have that in our human nature. We want to, we may judge other people a little bit more harshly, but when it comes to the people we love and we care about, we're going to do everything we can to try to protect them. So, it's understandable, and it's complicated. It's understandable, it's complicated, but it also shows a little bit of hypocrisy on Mark's side. And I wonder how much more they're going to dive into that hypocrisy as the show continues to progress this season. And the last thing I'll leave off with this, because I am someone who has read some of the comics, but I am behind, and I know some of the story of the comics, but I do not know this. And that is, who was watching them at the end? Who is this villain they're teasing, and who was this guy watching them at the end of the show? I'm very curious to find out who that was, and I think we probably won't take too long to find out, I hope. But anyway, guys, that was 3 awesome episodes of Invincible. And there's a clear difference, to me, there's a clear difference between this show and the Spider-Man show that we're currently watching. I'm going to finish doing my reviews and stuff of that show. I'm really excited for the episode that we'll have next week where he interacts with Daredevil. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. But if you're going to compare the two, this one is definitely winning. This one is definitely winning. I saw someone on Twitter that I follow, and he had sent a comparison of Invincible, and it had like the greater symbol. And it was like, Invincible is greater than your family hood neighborhood Spider-Man. And it's like, yeah, that's definitely true. But I think the better comparison would have been like Invincible and then X-Men 97, because that first season of X-Men 97, man, was phenomenal. But this is still a really great show, and the fact that we can even have that argument between those two properties shows how good of a show this is. There is those little nitpicks, like I said, about the animation and some of the other things that could be better, and easily better if they just would have spent their money better, because I do not think these high-profile actors help or are needed besides your basic few, like your Steven Yeun and, your J.K. Simmons. But that's just how I personally feel. But guys, we're talking about nitpicks. Like, this has been a really good first couple episodes. And so, what about you guys? Are you enjoying Invincible Season 3? Has this been something you've been really enjoying and liking so far? Are you excited for more episodes? Who is the villain in your opinion? Maybe not spoil it down below, but who do you think the villain is? Could be. I guess maybe it's someone we haven't met yet, and that's going to be revealed. But anyway, I'm very curious to hear what you guys think down below. But anyway, guys, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, I hope you're having a good one. Peace.